Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another beautiful Wednesday afternoon. I hope you all are enjoying your week so far, and I hope you all are ready for a bit more orchestration knowledge. Now, a couple weeks ago, we went over some of the basic string articulations for your string orchestra. Today, we are going to be starting exploring those instruments in more detail, one by one. And I am a bassist personally. I play a bass guitar. You can see one in the back actually right over there. So I figured we're going to start off with my passion, and we're going to start off with exploring the intricacies of the double bass. Here's a picture of it on the screen. Huzzah! So starting off with some facts about the double bass. It is, of course, the bass instrument of the string orchestra. As you can see, it stands on a pin while it is being played, and the player will typically play it from the side, with the instrument itself just sort of leaning on the musician. It's a very large instrument. Something interesting about the double bass as well to keep in mind when you're writing for it is actually a transposing instrument. If you don't know what that means, it basically means that when you write for it on sheet music, it will actually be sounding different than what it was written for. So some instruments, such as the clarinet, are very minor transpositions. You write down a C, it'll play like a B flat, something like that. However, a double bass will actually sound a full octave below what it is written for. It is something to keep in mind when writing together with the cello as well, because if you want the bass double the cello an octave below, you will actually want the bass and the cello to mirror each other exactly on paper when you're writing it out for sheet music. This really isn't a problem when you're writing in a DAW though, because most sample library designers, companies, what have you, will take this into account so that when you play a double bass library, you are actually playing the note and not playing one octave below that note on your keyboard. Most libraries I have used that have a double bass will always take this transposition into account, because this is really only something that you face when using sheet music. The standard range of a double bass will be E1 to G4 on your piano. However, many basses will actually have a fifth string that allows for a much lower range to be reached, as well as extensions for your strings, which adds in a whole new range and can get the double bass all the way down to B0, which is really far down. It's basically the very bottom of your keyboard. When writing for a double bass on sheet music, it is also normally used on the bass clef. Makes sense because it's a bass instrument. However, because it is such a large instrument, it also has a very, very large range, believe it or not. And when writing in the higher notes, some composers or orchestrators will actually use the treble clef if the bass is in that higher range for an extended period of time, because using ledger lines just isn't a nice thing. Again, this isn't something you need to worry about if you're writing in a DAW, because if you're writing in a DAW, you're writing in a DAW. You don't have to worry about sheet music problems. However, here are some things you want to keep in mind when you are working and writing in a DAW, because each instrument will have their limitations as well as their strengths. When writing for a double bass and orchestrating out your bass lines, it's very important to keep some of these next few things in mind, because the instrument does have limitations, and instrument limitations cannot be removed in sample libraries, because that's not how instruments work. The bass itself is a very massive instrument. This is possibly one of the only reasons it can play as low as it does. However, this makes the distance between notes on the fretboard very large, and it is extremely hard for a bassist to play very fast, large jumps between notes. For this exact reason that they'll have to go from playing up here to maybe playing down here and then back up here, all in the space of less than half a second, which is very hard to play accurately. So when writing for bass, it is generally a rule of thumb that if you are going from very low to very high, you're not doing a very fast back and forth. It's more like a gentle walk up and then a gentle walk down, with a couple notes used to change between the very lows and the very highs if that's what you're doing. Smaller intervals are key in that regard. Because of the instrument size as well, the bassist will rarely use their whole hand to play the instrument. In fact, most of the times they can't because of the size. They'll actually just be using the first two fingers, again, due to the instrument size, and they'll be using those to press down the notes, and then they'll be bowing it, plucking it, what have you, depending on the articulation. These limitations combined with the instrument's natural low end means that very fast, short notes or fast and long jumps are just generally not something you want. Lower instruments, you generally don't want to have very fast note changes anyway because it creates a lot of mud, but even more so on the double bass, it's very hard to play them. And you might get a couple bassists that get mad at you because they'll be having to stretch their hands out a mile long in order to play something. When writing for a double bass, it's also important to keep in mind stops, double stops, triple stops, quadruple stops, what have you. These articulations are very easy to play on a violin comparatively to a double bass, because on a double bass, it is impossible to play quadruple stops, triple stops, or double stops easily. In fact, it's not even recommended that you play them on a double bass because for the same reason. The double bass is a very low bass instrument, and playing double stops generally will create a lot of mud in your low range, as well as being insanely difficult for the bassists themselves to play. So playing multiple stops is generally avoided unless it's for extreme creative reasons, or if you are not focused on realism, if you just want to be creative and you're not worried about how it sounds. If you can find a sample library that has multiple stops on a bass and you're not really worried about orchestral accuracy, be my guest, do whatever you want. It's your music. These are generally just general guidelines. They're not set in stone rules. They are some things that will improve relationships between you and the musicians who play your music, as well as just make your music sound more authentic and real, which is something that's very important when writing. The double bass is an extremely rich and powerful instrument. It has such a gorgeous low end, which is one of the reasons it's so popular, and one of the reasons the string section on its own is so popular is because of these instruments' rich quality. It is also the backbone of, I would like to say, your entire orchestra. Because the string section is the largest section in your orchestra, and the basses are the base of that section, it would then stand to reason that your double basses are kind of the backbone of your piece if you're writing for orchestral music, that it does not have a specific focus on brass or winds or percussion. It has a lot of power, so much power, unbelievable amounts of power. And while this instrument is extremely powerful in the low range, when writing double bass and getting creative with your music, do not limit yourself just to the lower or mid-low ranges of the double bass, because it actually does have a very emotive high range, especially when you're using very detailed legato or pizzicato articulations. This instrument can absolutely kill in those and give you an amazing sound. Well, that pretty much does it for this video, guys. I hope you found it useful and informative as always. When learning instruments and learning to write for instruments, I generally won't be including information that's important for the musicians who play them themselves. This is information that's for like composers or orchestrators. So I hope all of you out there who write music in a DAW or on a sheet found this video useful and garnered some new information from it. Even if you already knew most of what was in this video, I hope it was useful for you in other ways. And I hope you guys enjoy the rest of your day. As I mentioned last week, I do have an album coming out on the 26th of February, and we might be doing a live stream that day, so keep an eye out for that. And I hope you guys enjoy the rest of your week. Have a great weekend as well. So until next week, guys, bye-bye.